Does your pronunciation matter? Can you pass an exam if your pronunciation is not that good? And here is how it works. If you have a very good pronunciation, it will give you bonus points. It will give you bonus points. However, you don't need to sound like, and you don't need to sound, let me say the obvious first, you don't need to sound English. You can have an American accent and pass at Cambridge, doesn't matter. But in reality, you don't even need to sound like a native, you just need to sound clear. So the only way, and I'm saying this once again from the perspective of an examiner, but when I was telling you that I used to be an examiner, I mean I've done it all. When you say examiner, there are lots of different types of jobs. You can be an invigilator, you can be an interlocutor, you could be an assessor. I was all three. I've done all of it. So an invigilator is the type of examiner, the person that is there while you're taking your written test, and they are just sitting there and making sure you don't copy and giving instructions and telling you 10 minutes to the end. That's what they do. That's an invigilator. And they're there also to answer your questions, make sure you don't look at your phone, but also answer your questions in case you want to know, excuse me, but can I do this? Can I do that? Am I doing this correctly? Not that they can check whether your answers are correct, but perhaps they may have a question like, where do I sign? Where do I put my name? That sort of stuff. That's the invigilator. Then I worked I've done that like hundreds of times. Then I worked as an interlocutor, once again, hundreds of times. That's the oral test. That's the guy that asks you the question. So I get the question first, I open the envelope, I sit down with you, the candidate, and I ask you the questions, we talk, we do the whole exam, and then I send this to a committee of assessors so that they can give you the vote and decide the marks and decide whether you're going to pass or not. And that's the third thing, which I also did, completely different type of training when you need to learn to assess people. Now, the assessors, one of the things that they tell assessors in training is if the person has a foreign accent is fine. You don't have to judge. Of course, if they sound native, it's a bonus. You know, they are very proficient, clearly. But if they don't, you shouldn't penalize the candidates based on, well, I can tell this guy's Italian, or I can tell this guy's French, or I can tell this guy is Greek, as long as the accent isn't so broad as to impede clear communication. If that happens, if instead of saying tough, you say tough, or you say whatever, people can still understand you, not a problem. But if you say tog, people won't be able to understand you, you don't know how to pronounce that word, that will impact your overall marking and scores, because it could become a problem with your ability to use the language. So this is what you have to keep in mind. I would always say, work on your pronunciation, make it clearer, make it better, learn to enunciate properly, learn to perhaps try to mimic natives as much as you can. You don't have to get fixated. Recently made a video about it. Don't have to get obsessed. But the clearer you are, the more proficient you sound, the better you'll score. Now, clearly, pronunciation is not the only factor. Grammar, consistency, vocabulary, even variety of vocabulary, which is one of the things I was telling my students all the time. It's good to, as you're speaking, avoid to avoid repeating and using always the same things. Maybe instead of saying yes all the time, you could switch and say sure, of course, by all means, that sort of stuff, to make it more interesting, because anything you do during a test to demonstrate your ability and how many words you know and how correctly you can use grammar, these are all pluses, and they will increase your overall marking.